All right, let's jump right into this because what we're looking at today is, well, it's as staggering as it is unsettling. Picture this. It's 1945. Japan has just lost the war. But the men who performed absolutely fatal experiments, men who literally cut open living people to see how they would die, they were never punished. Why? Because the United States government stepped in and protected them. No way, right? But it's true. Today, in this explainer, we're going to look strictly at the clinical facts, the severe bioethics violations, and the geopolitical maneuvers that literally allowed the perpetrators of some of history's darkest medical atrocities to just walk free. 3,000. Keep that number in your head, because by the end of this explainer, you'll understand exactly how more than 3,000 human beings were systematically stripped of their humanity, turned into what their captors coldly referred to as logs. We're going to examine the stark reality of what happened to them, the specific horrifying bioethics violations that went down, and exactly why the doctors and military personnel responsible for this massive scale of suffering never spent a single day in prison. So let's trace this back to 1931. Japan invades Manchuria, right up in northern China. And this invasion was a real game changer because it gave the Japanese military a base far away from their home islands. And, tragically, an unlimited supply of people they just didn't consider to be human. Enter a military doctor named Shiro Ishii in the 1930s. He sees this grim opportunity and actually convinces his superiors to build this massive biological weapons testing facility. But of course, he doesn't announce it to the world. Instead, he disguises the whole shebang as an epidemic prevention and water purification department. I mean, on paper, it sounded like a totally normal public health initiative. But in reality, its sole purpose was to develop biological weapons and test them on living humans. And we aren't just talking about enemy soldiers here. The victims were primarily Chinese civilians. Everyday farmers, political prisoners, communists. The Japanese military just wanted out of the picture. But the net was cast incredibly wide. We're talking Russians, Koreans, Mongolians, women, children. In some of the most profound, stomach-churning bioethical violations you can imagine, even pregnant women were specifically targeted and brought in for certain experiments. But before we get into the clinical facts of what was actually done to these people, I gotta tell you the name the staff used for them. Because honestly, it sets up this deeply disturbing reality about human psychology and ethical detachment. The staff inside Unit 731 used one specific word to justify everything they were doing: Maruta. That translates directly to logs. They literally didn't refer to the men, women, and children in their holding cells as patients or prisoners or even people. And this wasn't just some casual nickname, right? It was a structural, deeply institutionalized method of dehumanization. By completely stripping the victims of their humanity, by reducing them to literal pieces of wood, it made this severe ethical detachment possible. It made it so much easier for the doctors to write up their clinical reports, and frankly, it made it easier for them to sleep at night. In their minds, they weren't killing humans at all. They were just chopping logs. Now, what is absolutely crucial to grasp here is the complete and utter absence of any medical ethics whatsoever. Doctors systematically froze prisoners' limbs completely solid, literally freezing them like ice, just to study the pathology of frostbite. Then, they thaw those limbs out to observe what happened to the tissue. They also deliberately infected perfectly healthy people with devastating diseases like the plague and cholera, just to track how the pathogens progressed. And maybe most shockingly, they systematically removed human organs. But here's the kicker. They didn't do this during autopsies. They did it while the victims were still alive. The bioethics violations here are just absolute. Which brings us to perhaps the most profound ethical void of the entire operation. No anesthesia. None. The doctors at Unit 17 genuinely believed that a dead body simply didn't give them as much accurate data as a dying one. Introducing anesthesia in their twisted logic would alter the body's natural state and somehow taint the research data. So, think about that. The organ removals, the frostbite studies, the disease tracking, every single bit of it was done to fully conscious, unmedicated victims. It is a clinical reality that is incredibly difficult to even process. 0. That's the number. There is no record, not a single one, of a survivor ever walking out of that facility. Every single person who went into Unit 731 died there. Now, given this total fatal scope of operations, you'd naturally think that when the war finally ended, the men running this place would be the very first ones dragged into a courtroom to face justice, right? Well, they weren't. They completely, 100% evaded justice. So here's what happened. In 1945, as it became super clear that Japan was going to surrender, the cover-up began. Unit 731 went into full-on destruction mode. They attempted this massive, systematic cover-up to hide the sheer scale of their bioethical crimes. They literally eliminated the living evidence by destroying any prisoners who were still alive in the facility. They burned most of their files, but crucially, they didn't burn everything. Some of their extreme research data, years and years of methodical clinical notes on diseases, frostbite, and how the human body reacts to extreme conditions, that data was actually saved. And this brings us right back to that critical question: why didn't they face justice? If the war was over and the facility was shut down, how did Shiro Ishii and his whole team of doctors manage to avoid the gallows or the prison cells that were waiting for so many other war criminals? The answer has absolutely nothing to do with a lack of evidence and everything to do with a shocking geopolitical deal that took place thousands of miles away from home. This is the transactional deal that basically changed history. The United States government, who was already looking ahead to future conflicts and the whole dawn of biological warfare, really wanted that surviving research. They wanted the data on frostbite, they wanted the disease data. Why? Because it was data that no ethical scientist could ever, under any circumstances, legally or morally collect. It was an absolute goldmine of extreme human condition data born entirely out of horrific bioethics violations. So a bargain was struck. In exchange for handing over every last piece of this unethically obtained data, American officials granted Shiro Ishii and his entire team total blanket immunity from prosecution. And here is the actual result of that immunity agreement. 0 convictions. Really emphasize that number in your mind. Despite freezing, infecting, and dissecting over 3,000 living human beings, absolutely not one single member of the Unit 731 team ever stood trial for their crimes. The impunity was just absolute. They packed up and returned to civilian life. Actually, many of these doctors went on to have highly successful, widely respected medical and academic careers in post-war Japan, entirely shielded by the deal they made. It's wild. Following 1945, what we saw were painful decades of outright denial. The Japanese government flat out denied that Unit 731 even existed. It wasn't until the 1980s that we saw the very first kind of reluctant formal acknowledgments. And then more details and further acknowledgments finally trickled out in the 2000s. But even today, with all the facts known and the history totally documented, there has been absolutely 0 compensation ever paid to the families of the victims. The lasting legacy of that immunity deal is basically a permanent denial of restitution. But history cannot be entirely erased. The actual physical building where Unit 731 operated, it still stands in urban China today. It's actually been preserved as a museum. It just sits there as this stark, undeniable physical reminder of these profound ethical failures. It's literally a monument to what happens when human beings are reduced to logs and when medical science is allowed to operate completely divorced from morality. Ultimately, the massive bioethical violations committed by Unit 731 directly force the world to wake up and establish global medical frameworks. The principles that have eventually shaped modern informed consent laws, they were deeply influenced by the need to prevent this exact type of atrocity from ever happening again. The sheer horror of these acts necessitated strict legal boundaries around human experimentation, clearly defining what scientists can and cannot do on an international level. But if the very foundation of modern medical ethics was built on the hidden ashes of Unit 731 and secret immunity deals, we really have to ask ourselves, what ethical compromises are governments still making today?